Morena koutou. Before we begin with our karakia timitanga, just a reminder that our meetings are live streamed and we also have attendees online, so please make sure you use the microphones. I'm Yarana. That's my first meeting as chair of FRAC, and I'm looking forward to having all of us around, scrutinising and frackinizing the material. But let's we'll begin with our karakia. And please join in if you want to. Manawa mai te Māori nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi. He manawa nui, he manawa tahi, he manawa ora e. Ka whakamaua ki a Tina, hui e, tā hiki e. So we'll begin with apologies, and I see that Councillor Free is joining us online. Otherwise, there are no other apologies. Any conflicts of interest to declare? None. We'll get into, and clearly there's no public to participate yet. So we'll get into our first decision paper that we'll be making coming up, Jacob, on our exciting forward work program.
Hello to the committee. This is a paper that you'll be seeing regularly. It's a quarterly paper. It provides an outline of the forward work program over the next 12 months. So it gives you an opportunity to see what papers are coming up, both in terms of the meeting and also the workshop as well. It is a decision paper, so we are seeking your decision. There is a new structure around this paper from the previous FRAC in that it will also be going to the council as part of the chair's report, so post this meeting. So that will also provide council with an opportunity to feed into that work program as well. So I'm happy to take the paper as read and happy to answer any questions of the committee.
I've got Councillor Staples, and off you go.
Being a brand new frackette here, I do have a couple of questions about what some of this means. Now, on page 10 of the rolling, of Diligent on the 12-month rolling work program, we have a special meeting on the 20th of October 26 for skills assessment. So I'm wondering what skills, where, what does that mean? And my second question is on the next page, on page 11, workshops. We have a deep dive for wastewater, which is something I really wouldn't want to have a deep dive into. However, I'm thinking that we're handing this all over on July the 1st. So why do we need this? And if we do, what exactly does that mean, please?
So to answer your first question around skills assessment, so that special meeting is, so most of our regular papers and standard papers go to the other full meetings. Special meetings generally reserved for other items, generally the annual report. As part of the updated terms of reference, there is a new item on that terms of reference to understand the various sort of backgrounds and skills, i.e., do people come from a finance background versus an audit background across the committee? And it's just seeing if there's any gaps there that we need to be aware of and maybe need to address. It's just something that's on there annually. We haven't worked through yet whether that's going to be sort of a workshop base or whether it's just going to be a standard paper yet. But it does link back to that terms of reference there. In terms of wastewater, we did have a list of areas of risk we'd like to deep dive into. Unfortunately, wastewater is an area that people wanted to deep dive into at the time on the previous FRAC committee. That doesn't mean that this committee needs to be committed to those deep dives. As we go through these committee meetings, we might find other items that we want to deep dive into instead. I can actually provide the committee with a list of future areas that we or the previous committee wanted to deep dive into. So the current one that we're doing today is the insurance, climate change impact on insurance. Next meeting is a deep dive into ability to deliver the capital program. So those two are very prevalent to what we're doing currently. So even if we make a decision on this paper now, it doesn't commit us to having to do that particular deep dive, that particular workshop. We can still change it if we think there's a better area to deep dive into.
Thank you. It's most helpful. Just coming back to that wastewater one, it would be good to understand, and it doesn't have to be today, but just so we know, I don't like using the description deep diving into wastewater, especially with Moa Point at the moment. But given that we don't supply wastewater, that's not our responsibility. I would be interested to know what about wastewater we were deep diving into, whether it was the regulation, the risk of how we were enforcing that regulation, etc. Before I would be asked to make a decision on whether it was something that I wanted to do or not, aside from putting on my snorkel and my togs. So, as I said, don't need that information right away, but before we get to December 26, if we still exist, that would be really good to know. Thanks.
I'll just make a comment, Councillor Staples, having been on the committee last time, was that it was, I think it might have been to do also with stormwater as well, and also with I think with the new national wastewater standards coming up, there was, we did want to understand what the implications were around the coastal marine environment and some of the aspects of the new discharge rates and all of that. So that was the background for why we put wastewater in there. And I may be completely talking off the top of my head there, but I think we did want to include stormwater as well, because that is that's still, as far as I understand, our functions will probably have something to do with, regional councils in terms of that risk as well. But we can flush that out as we progress. And maybe one of the actions there is that, Jacob, you can circulate what some of the other topics were, and we can discuss that offline. Councillor Makarini?
Kia ora. I think you've partially answered my question, answering Councillor Staples, but just for clarification, do we have flexibility if things come up to adjust this work plan essentially on the fly?
Yes. So even though it's, there's some standard papers that generally you'll see from time to time, but generally you'll see like sort of the May, August, there's a lot more certainty around that in say like December. So as we move through, papers always get added to the program. So it's just the current view of the papers that are upcoming, and there is generally new papers added to the program from time to time.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just talking about if something like big comes up and we have to, kind of adjust our focus in the middle of the year or something like that. Is there ability to do that? Cool.
Yes, there is.
Cool. Councillor Free.
Thank you. Firstly, I am sorry I can't be there in person. I've just had some more surgery on my face, so I'm feeling a little bit like I don't really want to be too much in the public at the minute. But my questions have been partially answered. It was about our role as a regulator, and does that continue after the handover to TRQI?
Yes, our role as a regulator does continue post our handover to TRQI, and that was one of the reasons that we're looking to deep dive into that, was around that sort of regulatory role. Yeah, because I personally think my view at the minute is it is something we should have in audit and risk. I think it is one of our risks, and we need to make sure we're doing everything that we should be doing, and how we put processes in place to kind of make sure that from a governance point of view that we're comfortable it's all happening.
My other question was, and I think you've also answered this, is this is just the draft forward program. At what point does it become the forward program? Is it after we approve it today, or is it after, the council as a whole has had a chance to have input into it?
Draft might be, effectively it's always a rolling program, so effectively it's always in draft. We could take away the word draft. It's basically just a rolling forward work program for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Change.
I wonder if a better word maybe might be proposed, or so it's not, it's obvious, it's flexible, but it's not draft, which might imply that you're coming back with the final. Yeah. Anyway, it's just a nice point, but thank you.
Yeah, happy to update that to proposed.
Thank you.
No further questions from the committee. So, okay, I am looking for a mover and a seconder. We've got two recommendations: one that we approve the draft forward work program, and that we seek council's contribution in our April meeting on that. Insert other descripting word for forward work program. Councillor Macarini, have I got a seconder? Councillor Staples, would you like to speak to the motion, either of you? No. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, our next item is our risk and assurance update. Jacob again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Alongside me, I have Sasha and Vaughan from PwC. They will introduce themselves soon, and they'll take you through some of the findings in relation to the legislative internal audit. They'll also sit alongside Rajesh around the ratings management paper as well. As part of the risk assurance paper, I'll take it as read, but I did just want to highlight that there's the attached ELT risk dashboard from January, which shows our risk profile at that point in time. I'd also like to highlight, as part of the business assurance arrangements, that we'll be shortly sending out a survey to the committee as part of our annual review of the assurance plan. Obviously, as a new committee, it'd be good to get your insights into areas that you think should be on that plan. Just in terms of setting the scene, it's not the full review of the 3-year plan that's going to be coming the next year. It's just an annual check-in. So generally, we'd see likely to see similar activities still being on that plan, unless something comes out from the survey or from the other inputs into that. I'd also just like to highlight that there were 27 recommendations closed across the 2 quarters, particularly in areas like improved fleet utilisation from the fleet management report. There's an improvement plan for key controls that's now in place, and areas around fraud maturity, like there now being a central gifting register. Also, I'd just like to highlight the Comply With report, where we had, for the first time, 100% completion of the surveys, which is really positive. And areas of non-compliance were reviewed for an appropriate compliance plan in place. Also attached, you'll see the legislative internal audit, which PwC will soon take you through. From our perspective, the results were generally positive, although there is some large recommendations that will obviously likely to be multi-year, such as the compliance framework that have been recommended through that report. I'll now hand over to Vaughan from PwC, who will give us an overview of the report's results. And also, we've had a question around. I'll hand over to Vaughan for the results of that audit. Thank you, Vaughan.
Great, thank you, Jacob. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. So I'm Vaughan Harrison. I'm a partner at PwC. In terms of a bit of a brief background to my experience, so I've been doing all things risk and assurance for 26 years, including 13 as a partner. So I work with a range of sort of central local government agencies and also financial services and asset management organisations, reviewing those parts of their organisations that are important to them in terms of strategy, processes, controls, risks, programs and projects and the like as well. I'm also joined by Shasha. Shasha, would you like to do a brief intro?
Good good morning all. I'm Shasta Lawrence. I'm a director in the PwC Risk Services team. I've been working in risk services and internal audit for over 15 years. Similar to Vaughan, the bulk of my work is in local and central government in Wellington, and also do work with utility providers as well. And it's lovely to meet you.
Great, thanks, Shasta. So I'd like to talk through the key themes arising from our legislative compliance internal audit. Obviously, it goes without saying that legislative compliance for many organisations is an important foundation, but particularly more so for public sector organisations. So we were asked by Jacob and the team to come in and take a review around actually how well does GW as an organisation effectively look to understand its legislative commitments and translate those into appropriate policy, procedures, ways of working, supported by knowledge and oversight as well. So we focus on a few particular areas, particularly in the sort of warrant space, to actually understand how these legislative compliance approaches are coming to life. But if you step back and look at the overall strengths that are coming through, everyone that we spoke to is highly conscious and highly aware of the legislative commitments they need to comply with, which has really been fostered by quite a good culture, right, in terms of actually understanding the importance of it, as opposed to seeing it as a necessary evil, as something that's fundamental to the success of the council. Associated with that, there's a lot of great technical knowledge around actually what does that mean to us as a council, what does that mean to us as a team, and what does that mean to me as an individual, and how does that get translated into actual day-to-day processes which people can use to demonstrate they meet those commitments, but also navigate them, and also sort of engage with one another where they come across certain situations which may be unique or novel as well. So we're looking at plenty of examples around actually how those activities were coming to life in the warrant space. And when you looked at the actual policies and procedures that people did have in place, they were clearly operating as well. But we have raised three findings, and they really can be anchored around sort of a common theme about actually how do we enable a genuine council-wide system for legislative compliance. So at the moment, there are pockets where we are kind of reliant on individuals and teams actually sort of doing the right thing, and that's not to suggest that they're not. But given that's something that's so important, it's about how do we sort of build up a compliance framework where we can really set clearly our expectations as a council that we expect each of our teams and people to be doing, so they know the breadth of their responsibilities and the things that they need to do and the things they need to demonstrate as well. How do we translate that into consistent sort of individual policies and sort of ways of working as well? And how do we enable that with the right sort of oversight just to make sure that that compliance framework continues to operate? So essentially what that means is that how do we remove the burden of compliance from the individual and the teams to the organisation, because that also plays a very important role in terms of the leadership and yourselves as elected officials, understanding about how all those day-to-day activities kind of cascade up to demonstrate legislative compliance, and provide you confidence and clarity that those areas continue to operate correctly, and then being aware of any sort of emerging risks or challenges as well. Happy to take any questions you may have on our report.
Just have a comment from Ali first before we go to questions.
The assurance program is a very important part of our control process and also assurance to our external auditors. I just thought, in line with your question, Shamia, we have recently changed out some of the assurance program. We put in the conflict of interest review because we had some issues in the last 18 months that had arisen in that area, and we wanted to be assured that we had the best policy and the best dissemination of that information so that the organisation is on top of understanding and fulfilling their obligations in that space. And I think we're aware that it has been there have been pockets that it hasn't been occurring in the way that it should, and particularly historically. So we want to make sure that it's working now and that we make it work better going forward. So the assurance program is another place where we can be a little bit flexible. Some things we have to do, and some things we can move around, and we can make it work for what the needs of the organisation and the most pressing things that are coming up and the most pressing issues that we want to work here. So you'll see if you go through your attachments that there's a list of what we're planning to do and what we're doing this year, what we did last year, and what we're doing next year. A lot of it's really topical in case you wonder why we're doing it. So We did treasury management last year because our debt levels have increasing significantly, so over a gross amount of $1 billion now. So we wanted to make sure that we were comfortable that we had processes and controls in place for all that that management, because a lot of our stuff in that space is actually quite manual at the moment. So we wanted to make sure that we had the adequate controls to ensure that there was no human error occurring. And you're going to get the rates management report next, but it's a similar one. I won't talk about the outcomes because we're going to talk about that next, but we are putting in a new system this year, and we want to make sure that what we're taking over was in a good space, and that once we take it over, that our controls are still in place for the setting of the rates, which, as you know, from all the things that have been going on, not so much with Greater Wellington, but with Wellington City and some other councils, that it can be a bit of a problem and a reputational as well as a legislative issue if you don't set your rates correctly. So when you look forward to the 26, 27, we will always bring you recommendations, but also as we go forward, as we said, there's a survey, so you can put your input into where you think we should be putting our time. And just a quick word, the data analytics is something that came in, I brought in with me from my previous job. It is a fraud protection work, where it's actually very much looking in the system and looking for relationships between bank accounts and companies and things, just to make sure that there's nothing untoward going on that we can pick up that way. Normally, in most circumstances, it doesn't. It picks up some interesting things. Sometimes you find out people are a couple who you didn't know because they share a bank account, but normally it doesn't pick up anything untoward. But it is another really good measure and protection for the organisation, especially one that is as large as we are. And I'll refer back to Vaughan for questions.
Councillor Staples.
Thank you. Thanks for a great report. Being new on FRAC, this came at me. There's quite a lot in it. So I'm seeking just to understand here. Sorry if this is a very basic question, but when I look at the executive summary, the first thing you say is that we don't have an organisation-wide compliance framework. Now, that says to me that for the most part, we're doing what we're supposed to do and we're legally compliant, but we don't have this overarching thing. What does that overarching thing, what's the makeup of that? How is that going to work? I'm really keen not to have stuff that officers have to do for the sake of doing it. I'm much happier if they're doing stuff for a reason. So can you just give me a bit more explanation about this new beast that we should have to make sure it's not just another layer of bureaucracy, please?
Of course, yeah. And my key piece of advice with all of this is that the implementation of a compliance framework cannot become an entire industry in itself, which distracts our people from actually just keeping the council safe and discharging your legal responsibilities as well. So what it means is that effectively it's creating clarity for individuals and teams. Now, a lot of the time that sort of actually exists, but we did see sort of inconsistencies in that. So what it's going to actually define at a high level, I guess, is the objectives or expectations about, you know, how we want our people and our teams to be thinking about legislative compliance. My expectation is for the majority of people and teams that we spoke to, they'll be able to go through and sort of tick that all off and say, yep, we're doing all that. Oh, actually, hadn't really sort of considered that. Because basically what it's doing is actually allowing, I guess, those expectations about how do we as a council want to manage compliance to come from the leadership, which it does currently, but kind of formalises that in a bit more. So it kind of sets the expectations, but kind of sets the boundaries as well. But that's through things like appropriate policy. But then from there, my view is that you don't want to go and create an entire industry. It's getting the teams to actually go through and say, what are the things we've already got in place that demonstrate we are already aligned to this policy? And actually, what are some of the things we need to do? But also supporting that through appropriate change as well, because it could well be that it means that some teams now, when they are sort of making certain decisions, that perhaps they're going to need to consult based on a certain level of risk with, you know, perhaps like the legal team or something. That's not us actually saying we don't trust you in your job. That's just a reflection that this is important. It's an important risk to the council, and sometimes it's useful just to get an extra set of eyes across it as well. So number one, it's actually sort of setting out with quite a clear policy about what that is, but some meaningful and actionable objectives that the teams can then go through and sort of start to self-assess to say, we're good there, I'm okay there, we actually need some work there, and thinking about what are the things you want to prioritise, because to your point, establishing a framework can't come at the expense of actually doing the activities that kind of create that compliance in the first place. So that's my key piece of advice, is it's got to be practical, it's got to be pragmatic, and something that helps and enables the team, as opposed to adds an extra layer of effort and cost associated with that.
Yeah. Before we go to Councillor Free, I have my question was in a similar vein as Councillor Staples. So I'm wondering, Vaughan, if you can, I guess, benchmark us to other councils or other like institutions in terms of that oversight that you're talking about. Like, where are some best practice examples? And I suppose, how do we balance that with what are the outcomes? Like, while we might be compliant and while we might be following our policy, what does it actually mean in terms of implementation and delivery? So where do you balance that, where you could get a perverse outcome where it's like, oh, we're ticking the box and we're fulfilling everything, but the outcomes in our community or what we're trying to deliver may not actually be aligning. So would be interested to know your thoughts on that.
Yep. So the council's quite consistent with a lot of other organisations that we see, and I kind of put you in the same camp, sort of like other local authorities, but also sort of central agencies as well, but also regulators. And I actually see the biggest risk to what we sort of touched on before, particularly in the regulation space, is that some of the time regulators are so focused on managing their own regulatory risk that they don't want a regulatory failure on their watch. So all of a sudden they create these big, massive burdensome systems, create extra work for their people and extra sort of like strain for the people they are essentially regulating as well. I would say that you're very consistent with what we see with other organisations. No one's actually cracked this. A lot of people sort of start, well, let's just get the legislation and every single sort of like clause and subclause that sort of sits in and say, how do we comply with that? How do we comply with that? But no, it's all about how do we create that clarity between sort of the expectations we have as elected officials around the things that we expect to see in place, translate that to sort of policy, enable the teams to understand what are the areas that they're already doing well and what are the areas that they need to focus on. But you'll find you'll go through a bit of a sine wave, that you'll sort of start on this and you'll get into a bit too much detail and say this is too much, and then you sort of start to bring it back up. Then you'll start to think about, are we really sort of across this as well? So that's to Jacob's point. It is kind of like a bit of a multi-year journey, but it's one that needs to be sort of, to your point, outcomes focused.
Yeah, sorry, just adding to that, because as part of finalising the report, we obviously did have quite a big conversation with Vaughan around actually how would we land these recommendations. And one of the key points is that we're actually doing a lot of good stuff already through the likes of the Comply With survey, which does also have roles and responsibilities built into it. And because obviously in terms of our vision in relation to this framework and the current environment, we wouldn't we'd look to do as much through the likes of BAU and stuff like that, and using the existing processes and controls and putting a bit of documentation and framing around that, rather than trying to like set it up as a project or something like that. So we're already doing a lot of good stuff which can actually sort of feed into compliance framework when that's in place.
Cool. Councillor Free.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question would be, if you're going to have this overall compliance framework, does the Chief Executive ultimately sit to coordinate that? Is that his role?
Yeah, typically those organisational wide frameworks, you would expect the Chief Executive. Now it's probably more the actual legal team that will probably have day-to-day accountability for that as well in terms of bringing their expertise. But given it is something that sort of cascades out down through the organisation as opposed to just being relevant to the legal team, you typically see a Chief Executive having overall ownership of the framework.
And I did notice in another paper a comment about legal advice being sort of a little bit ad hoc, and sometimes people weren't fully aware that other sections of the organisation were seeking legal advice. Would that all be tucked under and come under the same sort of umbrella of kind of a monitoring of what's actually happening in the bigger picture?
Yeah, that will come through essentially once it's sort of, those expectations around roles, responsibilities, approaches, objectives, come down to the teams, where the teams should, be able to sort of start to form a bit of a view and share their perspectives about look, what are the legal areas that we're comfortable to manage with internally, but what could be the subject matter or the scenarios that we come across that actually, you know what, from an overall risk perspective or sort of a comfort perspective, or like this is a bit out of our wheelhouse, now we need to sort of start to engage legal counsel. So yeah, it's just really having clarity around what those different scenarios are, where perhaps you need to escalate things and get that external support.
I think I think what might have concerned me was that I think the suggestion was that there was the legal advice being sought externally. It wasn't always reported to a clearinghouse. So is that going to be something that you would encourage, you know, a bit more of an oversight from perhaps top management on what legal advice is being sought externally and how it might sort of interrelate?
Yeah, and very much enabled by the legal team as well.
Okay, cool. I had one other question, if I may, Chair, and it's just to do with the continuity of service comments, the challenges getting buy-in to support staff being available for ECC. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Oh, sorry,
It might be someone else who needs to answer. Just looking at the cover page for what's going on in the risk and assurance space. One of the comments from management was there are challenges getting staff buy-in to support ECC.
Yeah, so
Is that staff or is that TA staff? What's going on in this space?
yeah, so that's internal GW stuff. So there is an improvement program around that, which has already gone through ELT. So there's some work in that space to try to increase that buy-in and get a lot more people involved in that area. But that's specifically in relation to GW staff.
Will we be able to have some feedback as governors as to how that's going in due course?
Potentially that could be an area that we could look at doing a risk deep dive into if you wanted to look at getting some further information, but there is various reports that are going up to the likes of ELT, and if it was of interest we could look at how that was reported through FRAC.
We're just going to hear from Nigel now, our Chief Exec.
Okay. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks Chair and thanks Councillor Free. Yeah, look, the ECC is a statutory function that the Regional Council has when it's activated by REMO. Now, the ECC Emergency Coordination Centre is staffed by GW staff and it supports the work of all the EOCs around the TA areas. We have a roster that we've had for a long time, and the actual issue here really is that sometimes populating that roster is not depending when the ECC is activated. Sometimes we have a challenge getting people immediately into the ECC centre. Now, sometimes might be a weekend event or an after-hours event. The roster itself is very well established. We have a lot of a training program that's run through REMO, and we have, in fact, 2 rosters of staff. But sometimes when we have staff change, turnover and things like that, it's always something we just have to focus on, making sure that our ECC functions are resourced within the organisation, highly aligned with REMO, and that we maintain a constant focus on it. So I feel we have it under control, Councillor Free, but certainly happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's just that it has been highlighted there as one of the points. Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Just 2 comments, if I may. One in relation to Councillor Free's point there. I think that the issue around those statutory functions also being raised in the regulatory impact statement of the recent emergency management bills. So I think it is an active discussion there. And just in regards to the survey that's coming out for the assurance plan, if possible, would we be also able to circulate that survey to other chairs of our committees as well, in addition to our committee members? And if any other committee members have any comment on that, please speak up. But I thought that might be relevant given the other risk and assurance issues that are very pertinent to our other committees. We can do that?
Yes, we can do
okay.
that. Yep.
Now we're going to thank you for all that information. Everyone stay put, because we're now on the next paper, probably the most exciting paper of today, which is our rating management update.
For some of us.
The things we learn about how rates are collected and calculated.
Cool. I'm presenting. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. So this is in relation to the work around rates management. So the paper includes phase one of the PwC report, which Vaughan will be talking to. Plus also it highlights work we're doing in relation to improving systems. In a positive, even though we had manual processes and controls, they were deemed to be effective through the report, but there was obviously several recommendations highlighted, which PwC will talk to. We'd just like to confirm that through the work to implement the new system, we'll be looking to ensure that those recommendations are included within or considered as part of that implementation of the new system. That new system will be implemented before the end of the financial year. And to provide additional assurance, we'll ensure that the existing manual process and the new system is operational alongside each other for the 26-27 annual plan. That will provide us with assurance that both systems are calculating rates on the same basis, and that ensures that there hasn't been any issues in relation to the stand up of that new system. I'll now hand over to Vaughan, who will talk to the report.
Thanks, Jacob. So, look, just to echo and expand a little more on what Jacob shared. So, at the moment, Greater Wellington is using an Excel spreadsheet to calculate annual rates, with a move to systemize it before the end of the financial year. So, the current spreadsheet has a clear structure. It's password protected. It uses color coding to identify key input cells and areas for calculation as well. There was good knowledge by the team around what are the key inputs, how does the information flow through, and what are the key outputs or calculation fields that they really need to deep dive into to make sure that the outputs make sense, they're consistent with prior year, and to help identify any outliers. What we did identify was some opportunities as part of the systemization of the model to enhance the security and the structure. So things such as making the guidance more end-to-end around sort of for the input fields, how do these get broken out into the different sections of the model? Who are the key people that need to be involved in providing inputs? And to remove some unused sections of the current model that exist. Separate to that, we also identified that whilst there are a number of reviews and approvals that occur of the rate outputs and calculations, there's limited documentation to capture and allow sort of that external or auditable trail of what's been considered and how any queries raised through that review process have been built in and resolved prior to the final rates decision making. I'll pause there for any sort of questions.
Any questions from the committee? Yes, Councillor Macarini.
I'm not sure if this is relevant for this, and if it's not, just stop me. But I'm just have a few questions around the new system. Is that where we're at? Is this the right time to ask those questions? Okay. So my questions, I've got 10 million, but I'll just dump one on you at the moment. So I'm just wondering, like, who's hosting the cloud that's going to be implementing the system. So I see that, just to preface this, I see that you're addressing a lot of the recommendations through the new system. So that's awesome. But yeah, my question is around who's hosting the system and what provisions for data redundancy are in place. there. So for just to contextualise that, so I know Microsoft have a shared responsibility clause, and so that's like no liability for data or corruption and that sort of stuff. So I'm just wondering, my question is more around that for now.
Okay, thank you for the question. So currently the service provider we're going with is called IBIS. IBIS is also being used widely in other local government entities. So a lot of the other TAs in our region also use them for the rates calculation and things like that. To answer your specific question about who the actual host would be, I'm not too sure because that might be a bit more technical with them, but we can find out and then get back to you because we're just still working with them. And we're also going to get our ICT to do a security check over all of those things to ensure that our data with them is safe and secure and things like that. So that's also part of our plan as part of the transition. I think Ellie's got...
Just as an added comment, so you understand we don't hold individual ratepayers' information. So this is just our rating numbers and how they're allocated into the different parts of rates. That's all held by the TAs. So the privacy factor isn't, I mean, most IBIS rating systems do hold that or hold some of that. We do not. So that is not so much of an issue for us.
Councillor Staples?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I guess my question, excuse me, is similar to the one I had before about the legal framework. I'm really keen if we have a system that works, that we don't toss it out and put it in with something that we're doing because it has bells and whistles. So my question is, what we're doing here, am I correct in my thinking? What we're doing here is actually, we're not tossing out how we calculate our rates. We're putting a system in around it to make sure that our security is right. And all those, it's almost like putting a fence around the house rather than shifting the house. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. You just effectively trying to just lift and shift it into a proper system rather than having an Excel spreadsheet.
Councillor Free.
Yeah, might have been, this might be something that Shamia's already asked and had answered, but it wasn't clear. What is our backup if, you know, we've got an identified risk earlier on of actions by other parties? What is our backup if this company fails to be able to keep servicing this data, or there's a outage in the cloud or something? Do we have systems, backup systems that are actually on board with our own equipment, our own computers?
We have if all else failed, we have the existing Excel sheet we could refer back to and use.
Okay.
The data is going to be held safely in the cloud and will be backed up, and we will have, as time goes on, a record of what we have done and held also, some of it held locally. We will have access to re-establish if something goes wrong. We would consider that extremely unlikely, but of course anyone can be attacked in a cybersecurity attack or have a vulnerability established. IBIS hosts many rate systems, excuse me, for councils across the country, and has done for many, many years, and is one of the most respected providers. So that also gives us assurance.
Yeah, I'm not querying their credentials. It's just that anything can happen, as we've seen. You know, lots of funny things that you would never expect to happen can actually happen. So I'm just asking, and you have been reassured that there is a backup system held locally.
On the same line as my previous question, having learnt that maybe most of local government runs off an Excel spreadsheet, curious to know, in your experience at PwC, what's the breadth and spread out there of the kinds of ways that rates are calculated and held?
So there is a variety, and the way we look at it is both not only sort of the systems and data, but also the processes and controls that sit around it. Excel is never an ideal solution to have, such an important, calculation working on. But often with the risk that it actually carries, it actually gets management hyper-focused on actually saying what are the safeguards we need to build in terms of the reconciliations of the data, the checking of the calculations, the testing of the actual results, and looking at the trends as well. So in some ways, that kind of the limitations of Excel do encourage some greater process, which is in control, which we've seen here. But my advice is you aren't actually going to a system, but we've seen it at other councils that are highly systemised. And some of the times too much reliance is placed on the actual system, where actually it's because it's produced a number, it's always worked in the past, therefore it must be okay. So sort of those manual activities and controls and checks sort of start to fall away. And often it's when authorities start to actually change different rates calculations that they kind of, put some new approaches in, they test some outputs, they say that kind of all makes sense. But are they actually sort of testing everything in totality? So that's why we're focused for phase 2 around actually looking at how well have the council actually articulated their their design requirements back to the calculation needs. Then also looking at the actual parallel testing that's going to be undertaken as well, to sort of give confidence ultimately to the executive and elected officials that management have actually done the right work to sort of self-assure them. So my advice to you is that it's not so much are you on a spreadsheet or are you actually on a system. What actually drives success and manages risk is actually the quality of the processes and controls that either sit around that spreadsheet or sit around that system. And that's my advice to management, is that don't let go of your processes and controls that you've got placed now. You may need to do a bit less, but there's always got to be that need for that sort of positive validation as opposed to just blind reliance on system output.
Thank you. I think any further questions from anyone? Okay, everyone's broadly happy about how we calculate and collect rates. On to our next item. It's the audit report and board reports for Holdings and Greater Wellington Rail Limited. Thank you so much for all of that information too. Illuminating. Hello, Ashwin.
Thank you, Chair, but Rajesh will do it for the picture. Okay. Good day, Chair and committee members. Today we present to you an information paper on the Audit New Zealand's final report to Council and the board report for WC Holdings Group. I'll take the paper as read, but I just want to provide some highlights as follows. For Council, Audit New Zealand issued what we call a modified or non-standard audit opinion. They issued a qualification for prior years, which is 2024 greenhouse gas emissions, and they included 2 emphasis of matter paragraphs, one on greenhouse gases and the one on the future of water delivery. New for this year was that Audit New Zealand have included a grading on quality and timeliness of the audit. The Council received a good rating for 7 of these measures and acceptable rating for 3. For WRC Holdings, a completely unmodified audit opinion was received, which means that they didn't have any issues or concerns on the audit. From a quality and timeliness reporting perspective, we've received 7 good ratings and 3 acceptables. And just let the board members know that, or council members know that, any improvement identified are being looked to be implemented as we go along. And happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Or maybe my favourite one, if you could, just for the benefit of our new committee members, explain. I'm assuming that comment around our greenhouse gas emissions is because we choose to report on our Scope 3 emissions. So if you could just give us a bit of background around the fact that the auditing standards haven't been invented yet, which is why we get that. That'd be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and that's precisely the case. But on the brighter side, this year you would have noticed that from a qualification we have moved to an emphasis of matters. So audit have done quite a bit of work at their end and got a specialist team to come and look at what we do and how we do it. And we expect them to continue to do that in the current year. So we are hoping, again, fingers crossed, the qualification that you saw this time around as a result of previous year should disappear completely. And we should only be left with an emphasis of matter unless they've got another way of checking and giving us a better feel for it.
No questions from the committee? Great. I guess I'd just like to comment that it was very positive news to, sorry, I've lost my page, to hear that there was an unmodified audit opinion on our holdings and Rail Limited. So that's really great news. All right, thank you. Quarterly finance update. Not reduced, but Daryl.
Hi, bringing the Q2 financials to the 31st of December 2025. The report details the operating revenue, expenses and capital program of Greater Wellington. I'll take the report as read, but just like to point out that the full year forecast in the report was updated in January with the most up-to-date information at the time. And a couple of points to note with regards to the operating revenue forecast. For the full year, the revenue is up mainly due to Crown funding for flood resilience programs. Now, the offset to that is actually capital expenditure, so it doesn't go straight to the bottom line. Additional subvention and interest payments are also driving the revenue up. Now, that is actually doesn't have an offset, so that is good times, if I can use that term. This has been partially offset by reduced fare box of $3 million for the full year. In regards to operating expenditure, OPEX is up, mainly due to unbudgeted EMV payment technology costs and snapper contracts. There's a few offsets in there, but it's probably the two big ticket items. As regards to the CapEx full year forecast, Riverlink, it's down, and Riverlink is 40 million down due to delays and savings on the program. NLTP, National Land Transport Program, is also behind budget, mainly due to sort of decisions with Wellington City Council that need to be worked on. And then water projects, so 23 million by the end of the year due to phasing. So I'll open to any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Oh, it's just like our council meeting. Well,
Yes, yes.
thank you. Actually, oh, sorry. Sarah, you have a question? Councillor Free.
Yes. So I guess my question is the risk of the fare box recovery not meeting even the reduced targets that we're expecting, and what work has been done to try and understand how we'd monitor and track that, so we'd get early indications of if it's tracking less favourably than expected, and also how much information are we able to collect to understand how people behave. Like, for example, if the trains end up being even more bus replaced than they are now, how do we understand what that might do to the fare box recovery for rail?
Before we go to Tim Shackleton, who is an expert at answering these questions in this matter, we'll
just talk about the funding side first to get the background. So, as we discussed in the council meeting, at the moment there's a projected funding deficit in PT at the end of the year, partly driven at the moment by OPEX and partly driven by fare box. At the moment, the amount there is all covered by reserves, but if it goes up, we will have an issue, and I would have to come back to council to establish a funding mechanism for that with options. But in terms of how the calculations and the reforecasts are done, I'm going to let Tim talk to that.
Thank you, Ellie, and through the chair. Maybe just talking about the forecast first and then what we're going to do about the forecast going forward. We do have a patronage model. The model was designed with Deloitte, and it does take into account a variety of trends and factors that we're currently seeing. Unfortunately, our current forecast had flat growth for rail. We thought we didn't put a recovery in rail patronage for this financial year, but we didn't expect it to continue to decline after a pretty bad year last year. So we had a slight decline in rail, but the actual patronage has gone down by 6% year on year. So that's where a significant proportion of the whole is coming from. However, bus has also gone into decline, which is interesting because the service performance of bus is still very high. So our buses are turning up on time and going where they need to go. but we are seeing a decline. It's quite a small decline, it's just over 1%, but it's quite significant given the growth that we've seen in previous years. So we had a very small growth rate for bus, we had a flat growth rate for rail, and effectively both have gone in decline, which is creating the 3 million shortfall that Ali's mentioned. So that's essentially where that's coming from. In terms of predicting, we did go through our patronage forecast model with the previous council, I think last year, and we're happy to provide those presentations and slides about the mechanics of how we do forecasting. And we do go through monthly with finance and those figures, and obviously we update the council when we believe there is an emerging shortfall. What are we going to do about it? We've got a workshop on the 19th of March, which will look at the emerging trends. So we'll be trying to pull apart exactly why this decline is happening. We have noticed in recent weeks there's been a bit of a directional change on rail, particularly in the Hutt Valley line, and you probably don't need to be a mastermind to work out what might be driving that. But that's probably not going to save us. We still believe that the 3 million will be largely around where we'll end for the year. However, on the 19th of March, we'll go through some mitigations and projects we are looking at to try and turn rail around. This will include things like the Extraordinary campaign, where we're giving people cheaper public transport and trying to get employers to get their employees to use it. There'll also be discussions around an advertising campaign, particularly with the current disruption we see on the road. If you're ever going to promote the rail services, now would probably be the time for it. And we'll also talk about some of the other strategies we'll put in place. But as Councillor Free has noticed, the service quality on rail is probably what distinguishes it from bus. We are able to get high levels of service quality on bus, but rail remains challenging, and there are a variety of council engagements around bus replacing trains and performance reviews that we have on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're trying to be as effective as possible, noting that there are some real challenges in the rail space. So hopefully that helps.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Free?
Yeah, but I wanted to ask a follow-up, if I may.
Yes.
And it is about the fact that we're going to be putting the prices up and also reducing the off-peak discount. And I know we have had some data about what it's expected to do to patronage, but I'm just wondering how much, what happens if the whole thing turns to custard and we actually do find that we're getting even less and less people using PT because of that increase in fares? Do we have something in our back pocket that we can pull out to try and arrest the decline? Because I guess I do see a risk in this area, I have to say.
Through you, the chair, I think this is one of those really tough, I wouldn't say it's quizzes or puzzles, where you've got increasing fares to address a fare shortfall, and then you get increasing patronage decline because people can't afford to pay. The modelling work that we've done to date shows that for every dollar we put fares up, we generally lose 30 cents to people finding an alternate mode of transport or not travelling, essentially. So we believe we're still in that vicinity at the moment. So yes, we will lose a small amount of patronage if we put fares up over and above inflation. But we only intend to lose about 30% of the revenue that we potentially could have earned if those people stayed and used our network. In terms of, is there a silver bullet to get people to use public transport? We always say it's frequency, reliability, and relative speed. Now, relative speed on rails suddenly got a whole lot better recently. If we address those, then affordability is a secondary concern. It's very important for a number of people. And also relative affordability versus private cars. That includes the cost of the car and the cost of the parking. We don't believe we are too close to being uncompetitive with the private car, but once again, if the petrol price drops, we do see a little bit of a shift, and if we do see the parking prices in Wellington City drop, we have seen little bits of a shift in the past, but at the moment, in short, we think we are relatively competitive in that regard.
Thank you. I guess for me, I just want to have, personally, I'd like to have a real, reasonably frequent updates on how this is going. Yeah. Thank you.
Just on that,
sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. We do bring the financial report to almost every council meeting. Sometimes it falls out of sequence, but otherwise we produce them monthly.
Great, thank you.
I wonder maybe if there is a focus on, if there is a desire for a focus on this issue, we put it in that long list of deep dives as well, and then we can work together with the Public Transport Committee to see if we can collaborate there. Okay, and our next update is from Angela as our health and safety update. Angela, is this your first update for us?
It is, yes.
Fantastic.
Very exciting.
Changes afoot. Oh yeah, chuck that mic on.
Perfect. Oh, is that better? Okay, sweet. I feel like I need friends at the table. Everyone else had people. So thank you, Chair. My name is Angela Kimmins. I'm the Head of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Greater Wellington. I joined in November, so this is my first FRAC meeting here. So I'll take the paper as read, but just to bring to your attention some of the items in the paper. Weren't particularly in the quarter, but I felt were of interest and relevance to the committee, and that is the review of the health, safety and wellbeing management system that was completed by an external health and safety provider, Avid Plus, last week, and we are expecting the report in the next couple of weeks, which will go to ELT and then through to this committee at the next meeting. The other thing is the review of our natural hazards and their risks, particularly at our campgrounds, just following the tragedy at the Mount Campground, just making sure that we understand our risk profile where we do have people camping in the region. And the tragic helicopter incident that occurred near Battle Hill late in January, and the process that we're putting in place just to check that we are comfortable with our panel of helicopter companies and the processes that we go through when we engage helicopters to undertake work for us. So I will pass over to anyone who has any questions.
Councillor Staples.
Thank you. I'm a bit of a question bunny today. Thank you for the report. On page 129 for Us and Diligent, which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Dashboard in October, December 25. Excuse me, I think it's number 2, workplace violence and harassment. Is this external people harassing our staff, not fisticuffs and within because somebody couldn't get to the coffee machine or something like that?
It is definitely external people, particularly just members of the public when our staff are out and about carrying out their work. We did have a spate of incidents in the Cuba Street area where people were put in uncomfortable situations on their way into the office here, but we have had a number of incidents wider spread as well.
Councillor Makareni.
Just, it's not really a question. I'll frame it as one. Did you know? Just to follow up on Councillor Staples' question, I just really wanted to check whether you knew to note that actually, in regards to what you just described, Wellington City Council are supporting the Māori wardens to do pretty much 24/7 patrols, which is actually having a really good effect, and they're working in conjunction with the police. So I just wanted to know whether you wanted to note that.
Yes, we do connect in with Wellington City Council quite frequently, especially when we have issues out in the Cuba Street area.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, I have a couple. One is just going back to our forward work program and noting that our deep dive is on the impact of reforms, particularly impact on staff wellbeing. Just wanting to know whether just your sort of take on how we might see some reporting and information on that, and if you could just sort of give us a heads up on what that might look like.
Sure. So the people and culture team are actually pulling together some measures that we'll be reporting on to show and track where we can the impact that the reforms are having across the organisation. So not just using health and safety data, but also our people-related data and things like that to try and build a picture of where people are at.
Yeah, and I guess from the committee perspective and our responsibility as governors, it would be good to understand where people have, where our staff have BAU work, and then there's additional responsibilities. And if that can be flushed out, that would be really useful for us to know. And just a couple of points that you've raised in your report as well around the sort of employment relations and sort of WorkSafe reforms. When will we get an update from you of some of the implications of that and our responsibilities as well?
Certainly, we are tracking that at the moment. So the Health and Safety at Work Act is going through a reform at the moment, and it had its first reading in Parliament. Was that last week or the week before? So we're just tracking how that's looking at the moment. We are attending a couple of webinars that are happening in the industry this week, just to see where that's likely to land. But the focus does seem to be on critical risk and managing those as appropriately as possible. So we are turning our minds to what that will look like for Greater Wellington.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Angela. First one done. Yeah, still healthy, safe, and well. Because I get to be chair, I'm just going to say let's have a 5-minute break before we pass our resolution to exclude the public. So those who need to leave can leave. Let's have a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Just because we've got some very meaty items in those two sections. committee is present rather than anyone else, because we need us to pass the next resolution to exclude the public. So, Councillor Free, you're back with us. So, can I have to get a mover and a seconder, right? Great. Anything else I need to say? Great, done. Admin done. All right.